Welcome to my show. I tell people that other people do presentations, I do shows. Some of you have seen me probably might agree with that. I'm looking forward to keeping you guys awake without any need for coffee, chocolate, electric shocks, anything like that. So you're pretty safe here. For those of you who don't know me, there's just a couple of key things about me that you need to know. I used to be really good looking. Proof of that is that picture I have up there. You know, Father Time takes its toll. And like Renette said, I did start my career with GE. One of the roles that I had, I spent 14 years with them. One of the roles I had was I led our commodities business team. So I was in the direct purchasing department. And we spent about $50 million, my team spent about $50 million in machine castings, machine forgings, weldments, sheet metal weldments and things like that. And then, before I came back to aPriori, I was a sales manager for a boutique $20 million high-end 5-axis machining house. We made parts for, again, GE Aerospace, Ingersoll Rand, GE Power and Water, Clyde Union, all kinds of stuff like that, right? And so I've been on both sides, the buying side and the selling side, and hopefully I'll bring a perspective from both sides of the field, okay? So I like to start by telling you a little story here. It's a true story. So I mentioned that I was a sales manager for a high-end 5-axis machining company. We took this order for a couple of impellers for essentially an OEM. The impellers were going to go into a chemical plant. And those of you who are familiar with that industry, you'll know that you have an outage period. When you bring a plant down, you have an outage period to do the maintenance. And every day that thing doesn't run, it's a lot of money, millions of dollars, right? So when they say they need a part, they need those impellers between this day and this day, they need those impellers between this day and this day. There's no question about that, right? And so we took the order. We thought we could deliver the parts on time. We even had a plan B. So, we had a couple orders that we knew we could shift if something went wrong, right? So long and behold, we get the forgings in, and one of the forgings is too heavy to put on the Hermley, so we needed to do the rough turning on a turning mill that we had. But we only had one turning mill. We had a whole bunch of 5-axis machines, one turning mill. Turning mill goes down. We're like, okay, we've seen this before. It's going to take a couple of days to fix it. We have a plan B, no problem, right? Well, it took about 4 days for the repair guy to even get there. And when they got there, they found out it was a bigger problem that they thought over the phone. It took 10 days to fix it. Make the long story short, we delivered one impeller. They took the other one out of our hands, and they had to pay. We shipped the forging to another supplier, and they had to pay a lot of premium to make it on an expedite basis, right? Is that any happen to anybody anybody here? All right? Yeah, right? So I'm going to hopefully show you how aPriori can help you mitigate some of those risks, okay? All right. So I'm going to be showing you how the thing works with a lot of sample data. And all you're going to be looking at is like part numbers and part numbers and part numbers. So I wanted to give you a little picture of what is it that you're looking at, all right? So I'll have a collection of one roll-up, one collection of basically assemblies. These are the 3 assemblies, right? One is a thin sheet metal part assembly. One is a medium 4 millimeter thick type part. And the other one is plate, basically. Okay, so it's a heavy one. Then I'll be showing you a collection of, I think it's like 12 machine parts, ranging from some turn parts all the way out to 5-axis machining parts. And I also have a Graco plastic seat in there with a lot of plastic parts. All right. Start out by talking about capacity risks. As my story said, right? A lot of times, the supplier is not intended. I didn't get up that morning and said, how am I going to screw my customer today, right? They actually want to deliver to you on time because they want business from you later, right? But there is, both of them, right, wish they had some prior knowledge for how much risk there really was in that deal, okay? And this is what I'm going to try to show you. All right, so what you can do with aPriori is ahead of time, before you even, should I reset that? Before you even send the RFQ out, okay, you can run a report. This is Cost Insight. How many people have seen Cost Insight before? All right, only a few. All right, so Cost Insight is a reporting tool that sits on top of aPriori. It allows you to look at all that wonderful data you generate when you're generating cost. When you're generating the cost, aPriori is also generating cycle time data and setup time data and material data. So it's all that information is gathering. What machine did it use? What size was it? All of that. It's gathering it's basically generating all of that for you. And this allows you to look at that. So one of the reports that we have created is called a capacity consumption report. Okay, and what this report allows you to do, and actually I have it in PDF to start with so I can explain it to you easier. Let me do that. What this report does is it basically takes all the parts in a collection. So this is the 3 assemblies that I was talking about. I pull them all in one roll-up, and let's pretend that this was a bid package you're sending out, okay? And it basically says, all right, for each one of these parts, what processes are going to be consumed and how many hours per year I'm going to need on that process to make the annual volume that you require. And if you're only making one, it's batch of one, basically, right? But this is just on an annual basis here. And so, for example, you got a part right there, and that consumes some 3-roller bending time and some brand brake time and some turret time, right? And then at the bottom, it totals up how much capacity you're going to need in each work center if that was going all to one place. Does that make sense? All right, so let's go back to the tool now. And let's do this. All right, so here you can see, for example, that for the laser, I can actually expand that and say, all right, I need a small laser, or you can cut it in a high laser, but I really need a high-power laser for about 500 hours. Right? So if you're going to send all this to one supplier, correct? And that supplier only has one high-power laser, you better make sure you plan with him and make sure that they have enough capacity, plenty of capacity, right, to make that part reliably. I mean, how about this one here? This shaft consumes more than 6,000 hours. That's more than 3 shifts. You're actually consuming an entire lathe for 3 shifts. So if this is a fab supplier that happens to have, that keeps coming up, that happens to have a lathe or 2 around because they do some lathe work, that may be the wrong supplier to send this to because it's too much risk. You actually may want to break that out and send it to a machine shop and have the shaft then delivered back to the other supplier, right? And if you do that, and if they have a lot of lathe, then you can use that as a negotiating tool because you're essentially renting a lathe at that point. And so they should be able to give you a little break because the overhead is a little lower because you're getting a lot of utilization out of that, right? What if you're on the supplier side? Wouldn't it be nice to, if you're using aPriori to generate your estimates anyway, and you know aPriori is generating all this other wonderful data, cycle times and all that, when you respond to the bid, wouldn't you want to know ahead of time how much capacity you're going to need so that you can promise the customer, when you can deliver this and have a sense for how much your risk is so you can have, maybe we would have had a plan C if we had done that, right? Maybe we would have set up a supplier, which is what we thought afterwards. Maybe we would have had a supplier that could actually do the rough turning for us. If we had known it was so much risk on that turn mill, that we would have done that, right? Basically, right? That would have done that for us, and we could ship that rough turning out to the other supplier. All right, anybody makes plastic parts here? All right, so I'm I'm going to show you that car seat. And so if you were outsourcing this car seat, you can see there are a variety of parts, and you're going to need, more than one shift of about 100-ton machine, right? A shift and a half of a 200-ton machine. And again here, that one part, that one big part, takes more than 3 shifts, right, on a 5,000-ton machine. Very quickly. What else does that tell you, by the way, if you're making that part? But you can't do it on one mold. You need at least 2 cavities, if possible, right? Or I need 2 molds, right? Okay. How about material? Is anybody getting a call from a supplier saying, hey, I can't get that material. Can I substitute this one for the material you have? Show of hands. How many people are getting that, right? Supplier deviation request. Supplier material. And what do you take it to engineering? Engineering can say yes. Engineering can say no, right? And then you're scrambling, right? But what if you could tell ahead of time, again, as soon as you give the order out, how much of each material in that package is going to be consumed by that order? And you could plan ahead of time or make sure that the supplier has a viable source of that material, okay? So over here, this is the same 3 assemblies, right? The same roll-up, basically. And you can see that you're going to consume, 330 tons of that 1010 and 550 tons of the 1020. That's a significant amount. Your supplier better be ready to purchase that. Or if you have your distributor deliver to your supplier, you have arranged for that to happen. And that's easy material to get. What if you had something like this? I'm going to show you that machine parts roll up now. What if you have something like this, where most parts appear to be of a fairly easy to get material, but one is an alloy that might be hard to get, all right? Again, if you are already generating cost for negotiating with your supplier anyway, you might as well use the data you have, and you can see how you can mitigate that risk. This is basically telling you how much material you're going to consume in a year, but you can actually do it by batch size. So per order, I could say okay. I could say, I'm assuming monthly batch sizes, could be weekly, could be as many as you want, but you can say, okay, for every delivery, you can arrange with your distributor to be able to supply to this sub-supplier, right, 1.8 tons of that alloy every month. And guess what? I can tell them, you can actually no. I can actually have the report tell me what stock size it is. So I know it's round bar, this diameter. And by the way, you see it says virtual? You guys see it says virtual at the top? Right? That typically means it's not a non-standard size diameter. So this might have been actually something that's hard to get. And this allows you to plan for it ahead of time. Make sense? Questions? All right. Yeah, so if this was standard OD, we'll tell you what the standard OD was. You could buy a standard OD for this, but then it has to be bigger, and then what the system does is it says, okay, it's going to cost you more in machining than what we think buying a special one would be. Okay? So we do load standard ODs, or the most common standard ODs. All right. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint for a second here. All right. So have you ever awarded a part to a supplier that is typically reliable, and you start getting that part in, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. You got to do some rework on a lot of them, and then you go on this root cause investigation. You find the root cause. You find out that the part actually has to be made differently to be made reliably. The supplier wants more money now because they didn't plan on doing that, right? Does that happen ever? Right? So what if you could tell ahead of time what your potential manufacturing risks are on the bid packages that you're sending, so you can warn your supplier, hey, this might be difficult to make. Hey, this is a potential, pay attention to this, right? So again, with Cost Insight, if you use Cost Insight to generate your cost estimates, this is killing me. You can run a little report here. It takes seconds to run. Again, this is that collection of assemblies. You can see, you remember how many parts there were? There were a ton of parts there, right? You run this, thing says, of all those parts, 5 of them have issues. And these are the issues that it has, right? Some of it has hole issues, some of them have proximity issues. So when I was at GE, true story, bought a bracket. The top part was a rectangle, the bottom part is a triangle like this, 2 holes, right? It's about, I forget exactly, but let's say it's 4 millimeters thick. The holes have some tolerance, but not very tight. So supplier says I can hold that with my laser, right? There's a pin that's going in there. So the pin has a tolerance, but again, it's not really all that tight. It just needs to be a snuggle, not completely loose. But lo and behold, we start getting the brackets, and some pins fit, some don't. Is it the pin? Is it the hole? Right? Well, it turns out when you put that band, the pen was so close to that hole, it was deflecting just a little bit, right? Not enough that you could see visually. The guy was holding the tolerance with the laser, right? It's just that, and he looked far enough that he looked visually far enough that it wasn't going to affect it, but it was, all right? So aPriori will tell you, hey, you have a proximity issue here, a potential proximity issue. The supplier may have quoted it differently. In fact, they would have drilled that hole if they know that was going to be a potential issue, right? So they did want more money because engineering couldn't move the hole. I forget why, but they couldn't move them any farther out. All right. So how about if you are the supplier, right? So I'm gonna show you this on the machine parts. So a slightly different report, a little more fancy. This one comes out of the box. The other one I created myself. You will get out of the box for everything, for sheet metal, for plastics, and for machine parts. It's just that at the time I did this, the sheet metal wasn't available. But it doesn't take much to create them. Oh, castings, wrong one. Why am I getting the wrong? Let's go back to this. Did I pick the wrong one? The ones in that list are out of the box, yes. The ones on the other list I made, but it takes like literally 15 minutes to make them. Once you decide what you want to do, it takes 15 minutes to make them. And you saw how easy it is you can add filters just as easily as I added that other, the material stock name. It's very easy to use. So this is those machine parts that I was talking about. All right, you can see here, you have some sharp corner issues from this part. You have some obstructed surfaces. You have some more sharp corners on that part right there, right? And so if you're the supplier, right, and you're generating the estimates with this, right, you might as well run this and see where your exposure is. All right, I might miss something, right, and then quote it too low because I didn't see that. This is a perfect way of analyzing that. Or you can go back and ask the customer, did you really mean that, right? So on that part, this is why I have it up here. On that part, you can go with aPriori. You can just go to the Design to Cost tab. You can review the issues. You can go, let's just say, sharp corner issues. And you can ask the customer, did you really mean for that corner to be sharp, for example, right? That's going to cost you a lot of money. Did the engineer just forget to put a round there? All right? Rather than, and it's a matter of responsiveness to your customer, right? This is a machine part, right? So you could start out with a casting and then machine it, basically. I could start out with a box, right? And then machine it from there. But it is a machine part. You can see you have obstructed surfaces. Those are kind of hard to find. You have one right there, for example. All right. So it shows you basically what's going to be difficult to make, both from the customer side and the supplier side. Does that make sense? Okay. Excuse me?
We need to fix in the CAD model to get the proper cost.
Yeah. So if you put a round there, if you leave it like this, right, then it's going to try to use a dental tool by the time it gets to that corner to try to make it as fine as possible. But if you put the proper round, it'll use the proper size tool so that it becomes cheaper. So the answer is yes. All right? In fact,
you assign tolerances to that machine part?
Yep.
It'll adjust cost based on the tolerances.
Correct. So it will basically do a lot of things automatically. It will, if you put the tolerances in the CAD, we can pull it from the CAD. Most people don't. So we have a way for you to put them in, okay? And then he'll say, okay, if you have a really fine finish, right, it'll go to polishing, right? If you have a finish that's nice, but it's not really all that fine, then it'll slow down the machining process, right? So it'll add the proper cost based on the tolerances. And obviously if you need to drill and then bore, it'll add the boring to it, right? So in this case, he knows that the plasma, this is a proximity issue with that hole to the edge. He knows the plasma can't do that, you'll burn it. So he says, I'm going to have to drill it. And you can see how it added machining at the bottom automatically. You see that? So it does that all on its own. I'm out of time. Oh, I'm so sorry. You give me 2 minutes? All right. So tariffs, right? We're having, one day we have a tariff with this country, the next day with the other country. But what if you could tell what the impact of those tariffs is on the things you're buying, or how much exposure do you have in the products that you make due to these tariffs, all right? So very quickly here, I want to show you that you can actually use aPriori to try to assess that. So because aPriori is calculating or estimating the cost of the part and the cost of material, let's say that you bought these parts from a supplier. Supplier comes to you and says, about 80% of the cost of the parts that I give you is in material, and I got hit with the 30% tariffs. So I am going to give you an uplift of 25%, just a blanket, so I don't go one by one, right? You might say, sure, that actually, you know it's temporary. You don't want to you don't want to drive your supplier out of business, right? Because it's a lot of money. You might just say, yeah. But if you just want this report on those parts, you can come to a different conclusion. You can say, you know what? I'll go along with that for most of the parts, because you can see they hover up and down, right? Except for this part and this part. And I bet the supplier would be amenable. If you show them this, they'll say, yeah, don't nickel and dime me and make me go adjust each one, right? Just give me 25% for everything, and I'll give you the proper adjustments for this too. Right? And just in that, because if you're buying a lot of volume, that makes a big difference, okay? So let's take that one step farther. Let's say that you wanted to analyze products for which you have a lot of metal content. And what I did here is basically roll up this is by part, I'm going to do it by roll up. This is a beautiful thing about this. You can look at it, at the macro level or the micro level, right? So anyway. So basically you have a master roll-up, which is all the metal parts in a product, all right? And then you have all the castings, all the machine parts, all of these sheet metal parts that you make, and all the ones that you buy. And this one in the middle here, basically, you're saying, okay, for this product, with all the metal that I have, 50% of the cost of that product is metal. So you immediately know what the exposure is to these tariffs for that product. And you can do it for another product or another product, because the problem right now is I need to move stuff, right? I need to decide what I'm going to move. And you cannot move everything at the same time. You just don't have the bandwidth. So this helps you decide what you're going to move. Once you decide which product you're going to start, you can say, okay, let's go one level down. I'm going to start by moving the sheet metal parts. And then go to my castings. You might buy all your castings in China. I know we had a business unit at GE where all the castings came from China. Then we machined them here, but all the castings came from China, right? So you can, and then go down your machine parts will be the last ones, basically, in this case, right? But it tells you how much, it lets you analyze what your exposure is, right? And then which one, what should you do first, basically, right? So, and that's the last one I was going to show you. This is Cost Insight. If you're not using it, see your customer success manager. It's included in what you're paying for most of you. So you're really getting a lot more value out of aPriori if you make use of all the fabulous data you're generating when generating cost. All right? Thank you.